Well, I think we are about ready to get started here today. I just want to welcome you all to our resume writing crash course alumni webinar today, presented by Noelle Gross from the class of 2004. My name is Mary Zimmerman, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at Franciscan University. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending a link to all of the registrants, and you'll also be able to find it on our alumni networking and mentoring platform, the Barron Bridge, and that's at barronbridge.franciscan.edu. We have a lot of events coming up soon, a lot of regional events in the next few months. You can find all of these on our alumni website at alumni.franciscan.edu. And that will have all of our alumni happenings, our newsletter, any information that you need. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Noelle to get us started today.
All right, Mary, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. You are here today because you have some doubts about your resume, if I'm correct on that point. And maybe your resume is not working for you and you want to know what you're doing wrong. Or maybe you have just one burning resume issue that constantly causes you to question every job application you submit. Or maybe you're planning for a career move and you know the resume will be really, really important for the weeks and months ahead. And so today I'm going to put you at ease. I'm going to give you the full scoop on everything you need to know to feel confident about your resume and about sending your resume and your application packages. And so I want you to sit back, take in as much information as you can, and there will be time for a Q&A at the end. So if there's something that you want to know that I don't address today, just know that I'll stick around at the end to take as many questions as you have. Now, before we get started, I like to always share my story and how I ended up here teaching you about resumes. And my story really starts with a defining moment in my career, and that was a few years ago. I had taken time off from the workforce to pursue my MBA. And my goal was really to, top up my career, make a career change, hopefully make more money, change industries, the whole 9 yards. That's why I went back to school. And at the end of my program, I found myself in a much different place. I found myself unemployed, which was not really where I had expected to be. And one thing I learned pretty quickly about being unemployed and being thrown into the job search is that it's not a lot of fun. That was my experience. And that's probably your experience as well if you're in the job search. And the reason for this, there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, there's a ton of uncertainty in the job search. There's a lot of rejection, right? You're sending out those applications. You're either not hearing back or you're getting those automated rejection emails. And after a while of putting yourself through this constant rejection, this constant uncertainty, the job search can start to become a very discouraging place. And that was my experience in the job search. It's just terrible, really. Nothing I'd ever want to repeat. But so I struggled in the job search, and about 6 months later, landed a job as an executive recruiter. And this was not my ideal job. This wasn't the job I really wanted coming out of the MBA, but it was a good opportunity. It was better than continuing to apply for jobs. And so I took the job. And little did I know this would be a huge blessing in my life. It would totally set me on a different career path and kind of leading me to where I am today. So it was a good thing at the time. It was a good thing in hindsight, but at the time I was not thrilled about this career move. But one of the things I learned pretty quickly when I entered the executive recruiting industry was I started to learn what companies look for when they hire top talent. And I also learned something that stuck out even more to me, and that was I started to learn what mistakes job seekers make when they are in the job search. And the reason I came to this the reason I realized there were a lot of job seekers making these mistakes is that I would receive hundreds of resumes a week and they would all end up in my trash. So I realized that there was this kind of problem in the job search, that people were sending resumes, but they weren't fit. They were ending up in the trash. And it wasn't just people who were starting their careers, who were entry level early on. It was people across the entire career spectrum. people who were very senior, very experienced professionals. There just seemed to be a lot of confusion about how to maneuver the job search. Now, eventually I decided to leave recruiting. And because of the insights that I had gained into the hiring side of things and the recruiting side of things, I experienced a much less painful job search of those from my past. And as I was, putting myself there to apply for new jobs to get out of recruiting, I was able to land really one of the first jobs that I applied to within a month of applying. The job was a career change, so a very difficult career move. It was a step up on the career ladder. It was more the level of where I wanted to be coming out of an MBA program. I had to navigate an intense interview process. I was able to negotiate more money and ultimately beat a candidate who was more qualified for the position than I was. And it was then that I had realized that I really understood how this process all worked, and eventually left that job to start my own company, ngcareerstrategy.com, where my mission is to create a short, pain-free, hope-filled job search for job seekers. And I do this by sharing my hiring insights and my job search strategies with job searchers in order to simplify the job search and really help my clients land jobs in half the time of the average job search, which tends to be about 6 months or so. Specifically, the things that I do in my organization are we do resumes. So we do resume writing, LinkedIn profile writing, LinkedIn coaching for people who are new to the platform, general career coaching, interview coaching, clarity coaching, job search coaching. And then I do a lot of group training, which brings me to you today. And the most recent addition to my services and what I do is I launched the Job Search Accelerator, which is a membership community. And it's really a one-stop shop for access to all of my job search resources and everything that my clients need to stay in control of the job search. So all of my workshop recordings, resume templates, free resume reviews, interview templates, organizational tools, and a whole lot more. And at the end of the webinar today, I'll actually be offering a special promotion for you to access this for free. So please stay till the end so you get the code, and you'll be able to check that out and download some great resume templates. So let's jump into the agenda for our time together today. Today's webinar is all about resumes. And it never fails that whenever I teach a workshop, no matter what the topic, it could be a workshop on LinkedIn or on interviewing, whatever the topic, my attendees seem to ask the most questions around resumes. Resumes are always top of mind in the job search. So we're going to cover that today in full detail. We're going to start with the big picture strategy, how to really optimize your resume for the entire job search, not just, on a job by job basis. I'm going to share some common resume myths that people tend to believe, and I'm going to debunk those myths. I'm going to answer all of the most common resume questions that come my way. I'm going to share some guidance on how to incorporate really unique life scenarios into your resume branding, because as you probably know, your resume may not be cookie cutter. It may not indicate kind of a cookie cutter career path, which is ideal, but given how we experience changes in life and changes in careers and whatnot, sometimes our resumes look a little bit messy or sloppy in terms of the path we've taken. And I'm going to teach you how to tie it together to tighten up the resume for those life changes. And then also tips for conquering some tough resume scenarios, such as ageism, gaps on the resume, and a whole bunch more. So if at any point during the webinar you have questions, you are welcome to type them into the chat box. It should be on your Zoom dashboard, and I will do my best to either answer the question live if I can catch it, or I'll go back and read the questions at the end, and I'll go through them one by one. So please do jot down questions as they come up. Now, before we jump into the content, I also like to share a little bit about my resume philosophy, because there are tons of resume writers, blogs, websites out there. If you've been working on your resume for a while, you probably are well aware of that. So it's no wonder, people oftentimes get confused because there's a lot of information out there. And I mean, I was confused before I spent time in recruiting. I mean, writing a resume was a total mystery. There is a lot of recycled content and advice that sounds good, but sometimes it's not very strategic or effective when it comes to the resume. So when I started my practice, my goal was to use real world insights around how hiring managers, HR, and recruiters interact with your resume when they're looking to hire a candidate in order to formulate my clients' resume strategies. So when I talk about resumes, it's always going to be from the lens of the hiring eye. And all of my writers, everyone on my team, has to have worked on the recruiting or hiring side as well, so that they can approach and see a candidate's resume through that lens as well. So this is where I'm coming from today. And I also, while I write resumes, I also have a team of certified resume writers, and we all really racked our brains to come up with this content. Where are we seeing the greatest challenges in our client interactions in terms of their resumes? Where's the greatest confusion? What are the biggest questions people want answered? And so that's where I'm going to be coming from today as I share this content. So let's start with resume strategy in the job search. We're going to go real big picture, how to think about your resume when you start to tackle your job search. And I want to paint a picture for you of a broken sink. Okay, landing a job is like fixing that broken sink. And it occurred to me a couple months back, our kitchen sink broke. And my husband, he's a real handy guy, and he decided that he was going to fix the sink himself. And so he crawled under the sink. He asked me to, assist in the task. And he said, okay, I'm going to ask for particular tools and you hand them to me, and then, I'll hand them back to you, and so on. And so he started, tinkering under the sink and doing whatever a plumber does to fix a sink, and eventually asked for the first tool. He asked for a wrench. And I looked down at the toolkit, and I totally drew a blank. I found myself wondering, which one is the wrench? There's all these tools. And I couldn't for the life of me recall which one was the right tool. So, and obviously I'm no handy woman, right? So that goes without saying, but I grabbed the wrong tool. I put it in his hand, hoping that I was handing him the right tool. And he took it under the sink to fix what he wanted to fix, and quickly obviously realized I had handed him the wrong tool. And so he came back out from under the sink, looked at the pile of tools, grabbed the wrench, and basically ended up fixing the sink alone that day. I was not of any great help to him. So it's the same with your job search, okay? Your job search is the kitchen sink. You're the handyman or handy woman, and you need specific tools to achieve specific results. You can't use a wrench to hammer in a nail, right? Or you can't use a hammer to screw in a screw, right? You need a screwdriver. Now that said, you could try using the wrong tool to fix things, but if you do that, you're probably going to struggle a bit, and the end results may not be what you're hoping for. And at the very minimum, it's going to take a lot longer to achieve the right result. It will also make for a very frustrating experience. So only when you use the hammer to hammer in the nail, or the screwdriver to secure the screw, can you get the job done quickly, efficiently, and optimally. It's the same in your job search. Every tool serves a purpose when used correctly, and when it's used correctly, it can produce optimal results. So here's a roadmap I use in the job search. And you'll notice that I have circled, the resume is just one particular part of the job search strategy. And it's only one tool in your toolkit. Yet for many people, the resume is like the end all tool. It's the only tool they rely on most heavily in their job search. They think the most effective way to use their time in the job search is to write and rewrite that resume and just send online applications. And I know this because many of my clients, many of the people I work with, this is where they spend, every time I work with a client, I say, okay, talk me through your job search and what you're doing, and we'll figure out what's not working. And 100% of my clients spend the bulk of their time sending that resume out. But the resume is not the only tool to open doors. It's a combination of tools working in unison. Okay. And I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So to give you some perspective on the job search process and the tools in action, I'm going to give you 2 job search scenarios just so you can visualize this. In the first job search, this job seeker is using LinkedIn as their tool of choice. Okay. And in the second, the resume. So when you use LinkedIn, the purpose of LinkedIn is to really network. It's to find the right contact. You're going to have a networking meeting. That contact's going to say, okay, send me your resume, kind of as a formality, or so they can get a sense of your background. They'll, ideally pass the resume to the hiring manager. The hiring manager says, oh, this person looks great, and it's coming from an internal referral, so I'll interview this person, and then that leads to a job offer. So that's kind of using the LinkedIn tool. If you start with your resume and you make that your main tool, the process looks like this. You submit it to job boards once you find those online jobs. Then the resume has to go through an ATS, or applicant tracking system, which is designed to screen out the wrong candidates or the wrong resumes. Then if you make it through that ATS, and many people do not make it through the ATS, then you have to be screened by a recruiter. If the recruiter feels you're a fit, then you do an HR screen. Then HR will eventually send you to the hiring manager for an interview, and then the job offer. Okay. So notice, if you will, there's a lot of extra steps that come into the picture when you're leading with that resume, and that's the only tool you're using. And all of these steps that I've circled here are designed to screen your resume out. Okay. Hiring managers, companies, they receive hundreds of applications on average. They don't have the time to look through 100 resumes to find the best person for the job. So they employ this technology and these screening checkpoints to save them time. So the main point here is that while, this is a presentation devoted solely to resume writing, I feel I always need to preface the presentation by encouraging you to not put all of your eggs in the resume basket. Yes, it's an important tool, but it's not the only one. Without the other tools, your job search will be an exercise in throwing spaghetti on the wall, just shooting that resume off to online job boards and hoping for the best. Now, if you're someone who was strongly relying on your resume and online job boards up until today, and you weren't having any luck, this should be really great news, okay? Because there is hope that there are other channels, there are other more effective ways to apply for jobs, to hear back from people, and to get into great companies. I'll be discussing some of those application channels today and how the resume works and along some of those channels. But what I'd really like to do is also refer you to the webinar recordings from the 3 webinars I did for Franciscan last year, which, as Mary mentioned, they all now, those webinar recordings all reside in the Barron Bridge. So if you haven't seen the other webinar recordings, strongly encourage you check those out in the Barron Bridge. So let's now jump into the resume. So we have some perspective on how it works on a high level. Now let's look at how a resume should look. And just to give a little disclaimer today, the resume samples I'm using are, for the purposes of this presentation, are, dummy resumes, if you will. So they're not necessarily content optimized. I'm just using a lot of this visually to make a point and to show you the visuals on this. So if while I'm going through the presentation, you can't read all of the statements, or the text is too small or something, don't worry. It's more important that you're getting the visual on these. And for the content parts, I'll have the examples as text within the slide so that it's very clear, and I'll highlight those for you. So there are several key parts to every resume, and this is the bare minimum for the parts you should have. You can add in more parts, and I'll show you how to do that later in the presentation, but you should not have any fewer than these parts. So the first part is that header, right? That's where you have your name and your contact information. And you'll notice on this header that I do not have a physical mailing address. You do not need to include a physical mailing address on your resume. That's somewhat outdated practice. The only time I would use a physical mailing address is if it's a job posting where they're looking for local candidates and you're a local candidate, then that would make sense to use the physical address. But usually we want to have email address and phone number at a minimum. It's really nice to have the LinkedIn profile URL in there. And if you have a website or any other places to direct people like that, those are nice there as well. The second key part to any resume is the headline and the summary. Now you'll see I have a huge headline there, product marketing manager, really jumps off the page, right? this is so important because this is a key branding tool to capture the reader's eye, as they glance at the resume for the first time. So you want to have a tailored headline and then a summary that's a very high level description of who you are as a professional. The third section is the skills section. You'll notice I have a bunch of keywords and they're divided by divider lines. This is an example, this section of the keywords not being relevant to the full resume. It's just, again, like a resume I pieced together. But the idea is you want to have skills that you're grabbing directly from the job description that are going to jump out to the hiring manager who's looking for those specific skills. And the skills, we'll talk about this a little later on, that skill section is really important also for ATS systems and getting through the ATS. Next, you have the experience section, the bulk of your resume, obviously, and all of your jobs and your career history. And then last but not least, the education section. Okay, so this is the bare minimum that you should have on a resume. And I should mention in that particular order, okay? Education, we always put at the bottom and the headline at the top. Now, one question I receive a lot is what kind of resume performs best? And the simple answer to that is a resume that achieves fit, okay? Hiring managers want to know you can do the job the best. The closest they can get to figuring out if you can do this is if you have done this before, if you've done this recently, or if you have taken the steps via your prior roles or via certifications and current education to do the job in the future. So essentially, they want to know you are relevant. If you have a relevant resume, you'll find that when you apply to jobs online, you're getting contacted. They're inviting you in for an interview. If your resume is not achieving the desired fit for the role, you'll find you don't get a whole lot of traction from online applications, okay? So if you're an exact or close fit, again, online applications will work in your favor. If you're a career changer or it's a stretch to fit, one of my clients I'm working with right now, former seminarian and got into construction and now wants to get into sales, that's a big career change situation. So the strategy for him is his resume is going to be a tough sell. We'll brand it as much as possible, but really his job is to lead with the networking and talking to people and getting a foot in the door that way. Really important food for thought, not only as you read about how to position yourself as a fit, but also as you think about your overall brand and how it's communicated in the hiring manager or resume reading experience, is that resume reading is a one-way street, okay? The reader is not with you when they do the first scan or initial read through. So sometimes we have like funky career moves on the resume, or there's things we want to explain or make sure it's understood. Just know that because of the nature of the resume reading experience, there's going to be a lag time where you're not going to be able to explain things. So things have to be really clear in your resume. You don't want to get into creative writing. That's not going to serve you well. You want to tell them exactly what you did, tell them how it's relevant. Don't include items that could be wrongly perceived. Perception is reality. So for example, for this client that I'm working with, who is the former seminarian, for the part of his resume where we talk about what he was doing while he was in seminary, we kind of dumb that down a little bit because he's not applying to necessarily Catholic organizations or organizations where they would appreciate or understand that. So we kind of scale that back, how we talk about that. And then we beef up the other types of skills that are more relevant for a sales role. Now, he does want to apply for some Catholic organizations. When we apply to Catholic organizations, we beef that section back up, okay? So it's always this exercise in how am I being perceived? How can I make sure I'm perceived as an attractive candidate to the employer? And then last but not least, don't format in a confusing way. One resume format that can be confusing is a functional resume. And that's a resume where you, instead of listing your jobs in reverse chronological order, you list according to your skill sets. Those can be very confusing. And if you confuse the hiring manager, then you're they have 100 other resumes to go through, your resume will end up in the trash. So you don't want to at all leave any sort of confusion on the resume. Okay, so let's jump into some of the myths and misconceptions. And this information was gathered by my team after attending a number of resume webinars and really being frustrated about some of the information that was being put out there. So we wanted to start correcting these myths. So some of the basics. A lot of times people say, well, I thought the resume should be 1 page. This is not the case. And actually the length of your resume really depends on the amount of time you've been in your career. So if you have less than 5 years of experience, say you're a recent college graduate, 1 page is sufficient. Once you start to, get to like 10 years, 10 years of experience, you've had a number of jobs, a number of responsibilities. Now we're on to 2 pages. If you're someone who's had over 10 years, say 20, 30 years of experience, you still only stay to 2 pages, okay? There are certain 1-pager documents I'll use for purposes of networking, maybe to give the client like a very crisp career summary just for a networking contact, but that's very different than a resume, okay? A resume for more advanced professionals is 2 pages. And again, you never want to go on to 3 pages. A lot of kind of fluffy resume blogs, whatnot, will say, oh, the resume is the story of you. Describing yourself helps the hiring team to get to know you. So the resume is really a formal document. It's not a story, okay? We brand it, right? We brand it to tell our story, but it's really not this story about you and your hopes and your dreams and your wants. It's a series of statements about your work and accomplishments that prove why you are qualified for the job. Companies, when they're at the resume phase, they care more about what you can do for them and less about what you think of yourself. So the appropriate place to get more creative in your writing and to talk about yourself and your career goals is your LinkedIn profile or a personal website, okay? Or the interview. That's a great place to tell more about your story and add some of that flowery detail. But it's not the right place for, the resume is not the right place for this type of information. Some people say your resume should contain everything you've ever done professionally. Don't leave anything out. You really want to just stick to the relevant information. So sometimes that means removing a job. Once you land, say you recently graduated from college and you don't really have, you haven't landed your first job yet, then it's okay to put maybe some college experience, right? Or courses you took to kind of illustrate your area of interest. However, once you land that first job, we really want to start to remove the college experience from the resume. So don't feel like just because it's been a quote unquote job and with a salary or formal offer that it has to stay on that resume. You can kind of tweak and move things around to tell your story better. And then people will say all information under each job should be bulleted. This is the easiest format for recruiters to scan quickly. Now, while it's true that bullet points make it easier to scan, really, we reserve bullet points for accomplishments. Otherwise, the bullet points, the accomplishments get lost and kind of hidden in the full description of your job. And when the hiring team scans the impactful accomplishments, that really stands out to them more, kind of when they see that, oh, the bullets are really highlights and not just a description of the job. And let me show you exactly what I mean. So this is how you should format your experience section of your resume. And I have one job to highlight this. The yellow part is a role description. This is your day-to-day and general responsibilities. And this is a little paragraph that you put under the job title. The bullets are those achievements or the results you've produced or the special projects that illustrate how you've added value to the organization. The bullets should show how you met or exceeded the metrics for the role, how you went above and beyond for the role, okay? And so let's look at the detail here just to really hone in on this point. So you'll see that I've underlined in yellow some general responsibilities. So the title here is a marketing specialist. It's a very vague title. Titles are very vague. So even if it's kind of a standard title at your company, a marketing specialist at another company might do something totally different. So it's important to just establish for the powers that be what exactly the definition is of this role. So you'll see that this person's function is to interface with the sales team, to engage prospects, to create account-based marketing programs. Okay, so it's kind of like the who, what, when, where. And then the bullets you'll see are much more high impact. So you have a head marketer in collaborations with the sales team to close VIP clients, and then they list the VIP clients they've closed. So this was a result that this person's produced. Spearheaded the new website redesign and migration, increased organic site traffic 36%. These are all very impressive things. So this is how you want to frame that experience, not just a laundry list of 100 bullets. And by the way, you don't want to go over like 6 bullets per job. You want to really keep it kind of 4 to 6 if possible. All right, let's move on to the visuals with your resume. Visual pop. Now, if you've done a Google search for resume templates, you know that there are a ton of websites that offer really flashy, high visual resume templates. But should you go in that direction? And the answer is only if you have another resume that is not visual for the applicant tracking systems. Okay, applicant tracking systems do not handle visuals well. Okay, so you want to really be intentional about which resume you're using for which particular application channel. So let me just give you some examples of what I mean. So the things you want to avoid are graphics, visuals, and icons, any active email or LinkedIn URL hyperlinks. And what I mean by that is, so you'll see I have my a phony email address listed there twice. One is in blue and underlined. The other one is just in gray. The one that's blue and underlined, well, we know that that's a hyperlink, right? If you click on that, that's going to pull up either a website or an email body, depending on what the link is. The email address below that, noelle@gmail.com in gray, that does not have the blue or the link. The hyperlink is removed. It's not active. That's the type of, that's what you want to be doing on your resume, because sometimes those hyperlinks will throw off an ATS. You want to avoid text in boxes, graphs, and highly designed resume templates, okay? Now, this doesn't mean your resume has to be boring, okay? And it doesn't mean you can never use a highly designed template, but what it simply means is that if you're using ATS systems and you're using one of those flashy resume templates and it has all the pieces and pictures and bells and whistles, you're just going to decrease your chances of getting through the ATS. And I think everyone here can agree that you want to increase your chances because you need to get in front of as many hiring managers as possible. So one way you can approach this. So for example, here's on the left, we have a resume that's heavily designed. And on the right, we have a resume that's ATS compliant. It's more of your standard run-of-the-mill resume. This particular young lady, she worked in the creative industry. And so obviously, if you work in creative, you have to put yourself out there in a creative way. You have to showcase your creative skills. But she was applying for jobs with the resume on the left, and she wasn't landing anything. Well, once we moved to a more ATS compliant resume, then she started landing jobs because she was getting through the ATS and she had a chance. She had a fighting chance at being interviewed. What she would do, though, is when she would go into interviews, she would bring the heavily designed resume and she would hand that to the hiring manager for the course of the interview conversation. And that's perfectly fine. I mean, if you're the strategy you want to always think about is like, who is the resume going to? Is it going to end up in a human's hands? If you're applying online, you want to use an ATS compliant resume. If you're emailing your resume to an email address, then you can use a heavily designed resume. If you're handing your resume to a human being, then you can use a heavily designed resume. Okay, so that's the rule of thumb. So let's talk about, now that we've cleared up a few myths, let's talk about what works. And there's an equation that we use on my team to really create strong resumes. So you use value add plus job matching plus ATS optimization, and this should be enough to land the interview. Okay, and I'm going to go through each of these one by one. Value add, what is this? Now, value add is a series of statements about your work and accomplishments that prove why you are the right person for the job. So this is, I want you to think back to the bullet slide. This is really the results you've produced. And the reason this is so important is that the results or accomplishments that you've done, that you've achieved in your past, show that you have the ability to make an impact in the future with your next employer. The hiring company is looking for someone who will come in and make an impact, okay? So how do you figure out your value add? Well, there are a few examples of questions you can ask. How did you add or contribute to revenue? How did you improve a process or a procedure? How did your work benefit a client? How did your work save the company time and or money? How did you develop or expand the business? How did you increase the customer base? How did you improve or enhance a project? Okay, so if you're someone who has, over 10 years of experience, you probably, some of these bullets probably really resonated with you because it may be even part of your job description to achieve these results. If you're someone who is maybe a little bit lower on the totem pole, maybe you're just starting your career, you don't have a position where it's going to directly contribute to revenue. The important thing to remember, if that's your scenario, is that you want to base this on the job metrics, okay? You want to think about a performance review and the tasks or responsibilities you will be measured by and whether or not you achieved them. If you achieved or exceeded the goal that your manager set out for you, that could be considered value add. Usually there's some sort of number or percentage associated with this. So for example, if you were in charge of running an event, did the event run smoothly? Were the attendance numbers up compared to last year? Did you fix a hiccup or prevent a problem that somehow enhanced the event? These are the types of things you want to aim for. So regardless of your level, you always need to be thinking in terms of, how did I produce results? Okay, how did I exceed expectations? And then if you can attach a number to that, even better. So communicating value add on the resume. Where do you do this? We do this in the bullets and we do this in the summary. How? So you want to begin with a descriptive verb. For example, increased attendance, implemented, new policy that resulted in. So this is kind of the way that we want to refer to express the value add. And then numbers are recommended. Notice that, if you ever read a blog post or something, the numbers always jump out at us. We're always like tuned into the numbers. So this is where you want them to focus. This is where you want to capture the reader's attention, is really with those impressive numbers. Okay, the second component to producing a great resume is job matching, otherwise known as tailoring. That's how a lot of people refer to it. We call it job matching at my organization. And basically what you want to do is for every application you send, you want to make sure you have a tailored resume. It's not negotiable. Even if you're applying to two of the same jobs, two of the same job descriptions, say you're applying for a bunch of marketing manager jobs. Every job description is different, has different nuances, have different things that the hiring manager is looking for. So you always want to tailor so that you're speaking directly to that one particular hiring manager. So the places to focus on, and then again, tailoring doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can actually be a pretty quick exercise if you're good at kind of matching, keyword matching and whatnot. The headline, the title, the summary, you want to make sure that's pretty targeted to the role at hand. The skills are going to change with every job description, and the experience. Sometimes it's a matter of adding in a bullet that might not be on this particular resume. Maybe there's another result that's a little bit more impressive for this particular job. So let me give you an example. So on the left is the resume, on the right is the job description. You always want to tailor against the job description. You start with that headline. Okay, so product marketing manager, you would revise on the resume down to product manager if what you were doing is the same as their description for project manager. Okay. For the skills, you jump down into the job spec and you look and you see all of these bolded keywords, right? These are, if it's bolded like that, it's pretty good chance that it's going to be a valuable keyword. So product life cycle, roadmap, phase gate process, strategic planning, cross-functional leadership, all of these things would now become your keywords in your skills section. And last but not least, ATS strategy. So did you know that 70% of resumes never see human eyes, okay, because they get lost in the ATS? Very frustrating. This is probably one of the most frustrating parts of sending applications that I hear from all of my clients. ATS strategy. So one thing you have to know about ATS systems is it's technology. It's run by an algorithm, and each ATS is different. So not every company uses the same kind of ATS. There's tons of them out there. It's big business, and none are perfect. And so I can give you some general rules to follow to increase your chances of getting past them. But just know that it's you're kind of playing a little bit of a guessing game as well. So just do your best to get as close as possible to being a match to the job description. So number one, the way ATSs work is they do keyword scanning and parsing. So again, those keywords, so important. The skill section is a great place to make sure you're relevant in terms of matching keywords to the job description. Match job postings as much as possible. Use important keywords with greater frequency, but avoid keyword stuffing. So avoid overusing a keyword so that the algorithm doesn't flag up the algorithm that you're trying to kind of play the system, because sometimes they will kick someone out if they sense that they are keyword stuffing as well. You need to spell out words and abbreviate. So for example, if you're a CPA or you're talking about working with CPA firms, and that's important on the job spec, you would put CPA and also certified public accountant. Stick to common resume headings: experience, education, skills, kind of the standards that I shared when I showed you that resume example. Going off grid, getting too creative, not a good strategy here. You always want to just be very standard to kind of resume best practices. And then in every ATS, or in most ATSs, in the application, it'll give you a series of knockout questions. Knockout questions are questions that, just as it sounds, are designed to knock you out of the process. And so if they're asking you questions and you're supposed to take a box, yes or no, you obviously have to answer honestly. So if there's a question and you don't meet the standards for that question, right, and you have to check the no box, for example, you have to do that to submit the application. There's no way around it. But if you're finding that you're applying for jobs that have a lot of knockout questions that are disqualifying you, then it's a really good practice to rely more on networking as your tool of choice. To talk to people that work at that company, forge connections, get to the point where they're going to pass your resume through, and then ATS, then applications become kind of a formality. So we'll say, we'll apply online, I'll hand your resume to the hiring manager. That's really the only way around that, okay? Now let's jump into some more commonly asked questions. And a lot of times when people ask questions, so one of the answers they'll hear from us is, well, that depends, because resumes are so unique. People's experience is so unique. So sometimes the answer really depends on your career path, your situation, the employer, their needs, the job spec, a whole number of variables. So, try to, as I'm going through these questions, and really try to envision your particular situation with regards to my answer. And you should be okay, but sometimes we have kind of tricky scenarios. So there can always be exceptions to these rules. Question number one, why am I not getting any responses to my applications? Why won't the company acknowledge me? Very common question. Potential issues are as follows: job matching or tailoring is off. It's the ATS system, you're not getting through. or you're not a fit. Okay. Two of the issues we can change with resume writing. One issue we cannot. If you're not a fit, no amount of writing can make you a fit. Okay. This has to be changed with experiential or a skills top up. How do I account for employment gaps? So employment gaps used to really instill a lot of fear into people, job seekers, that is. They felt that if they had an employment gap, they could not be hired. The world of employment has changed drastically. And so we kind of adapt the answers to these questions as the world of employment adapts. So unless you have over 1 year of a gap, don't worry too much about it. Companies understand that it takes time to land a job, and so they tend to be pretty forgiving. One way to lessen the gap is to kind of drop the month from the dates. Early career gaps are not an issue. So say you've been working for 10 years and you had a gap 5 years ago, not an issue at all. It's only more of the recent gaps that are usually an issue. For very recent gaps, focus on making them less obvious. Fill the gap with a brief line explaining what you were doing or what you accomplished during that downtime. So what the employers want to know is, like, they want to just make sure that you weren't sitting around playing video games for that particular gap, that you were unemployed. They want to know what you were doing. So hopefully you were doing something of value, and you had a reason for having that gap. And that's what you really want to convey there. Pick up volunteer, freelance, consulting, or contract roles to fill a current gap, but don't overinflate that. So just kind of, again, you want to make it clear that this is just kind of something that I'm doing to fill the gap, basically, in the meantime, while I look for my dream job. And then COVID, that threw a wrench into everything. So don't worry too much about gaps during the 2020, 2021 COVID timeframe, because people will be very understanding where that's concerned. Okay, how to address gaps due to family reasons. I see this more and more, especially with my older candidates. So life happens. People sometimes think, well, I had to leave the workforce to take care of an aging parent. Life happens. Employers get it. They're usually pretty forgiving on this point. You don't need to lie about it or anything like that. If it's been for 1 year or more, you could add a brief line saying, cared for an elderly parent, or whatever the reason was for your gap, and then a date. You could also use the cover letter as a place to kind of just put a brief line about why you had taken time off. Ageism. This is another big hot topic right now. A lot of people over the age of 50 really feel like they're being discriminated based on their age, and sometimes that is the case. I saw this in the recruiting world. You'd have companies say, I want a candidate who's really energetic, which was kind of code word for like someone in their 30s or early 40s. Definitely not right, and certainly, but something that's kind of unavoidable, in the current environment. So what can you do to avoid ageism or reduce that kind of discrimination if you're at a later stage in your career? Number one, really leverage your network. Okay, your resume is just one tool. Remember that. Hold on to that. It's very important, especially if you feel you're being discriminated because your resume has too many years of experience. Only go back 10 to 15 years on your resume. If you've been in the workforce over 10 years, omit your graduation year from the resume. Pay attention to the resume header and any information in the header that makes you look a little dated. And one example I would say that's an immediate red flag is having an email account that's kind of outdated. So anything, having like an AOL email account or an Earthlink or some of these, they're email accounts that are associated with older people. So just to be blunt about it. So what I recommend for people is, open a Gmail account and use that Gmail account just for your career related communication, so that you can put that Gmail on your resume and there's no immediate judgments being made by the person who's reading it. Also add that LinkedIn vanity URL so they can see you're on LinkedIn and that you kind of are up with the times where that's concerned. It's a matter of presentation. Okay, again, perception is reality. How you brand yourself is is going to determine how you're perceived. You cannot afford to appear off trend. Okay. So I strongly encourage people, if they think they're experiencing ageism, to invest in a professionally written resume, especially if you're not someone who's, branding savvy, someone who knows how to go in and brand something and make it really, really shine. So these are just a couple suggestions to help you get past any potential age discrimination. And when I talk about an on-trend resume, here are two examples. The resume on the left is an actual resume, I received recently from someone. Again, for ease of comparison, I've streamlined these resumes to one page, and I've also kind of made, this isn't a real person. I made it kind of anonymous, if you will. But for someone, who's maybe experiencing ageism, you want to have a resume that looks something like the resume on the right. Okay. You want to be really on trend. Should I include short stints in the resume? So this is one of those answers where I'll say it depends, but for the most part, yes. If the stint was totally irrelevant, consider omitting it. Okay. If it just was something you picked up and it has nothing to do with where you're going next, you can always leave it off. Omit months in the date formatting. Again, that kind of lengthens the experience and how it's perceived. Just add the basics, company, position, year, and that's it. You don't need to, say you took on a part-time job as a barista just to make some money on the side. You don't have to put in bullets like made coffee, cleaned the coffee shop, things like that. Totally irrelevant. Just keep, again, use it as like a gap filler experience. If you have a lot of short stints, it might be best to use just like a one-line summary of the total period of time spent off the grid in your career story. So, filled various roles to make money while I was looking for a job, including barista, administrative assistant, so on and so forth. So that's the kind of one-liner summary you would use. Should I include hobbies or family information? Family info, no for American resumes, yes for overseas CVs. Hobbies, it depends on the company culture, the interviewer, and the hiring manager, okay? Use discretion when including hobbies because these could backfire or cause an interviewer to make a wrong assumption. Volunteer work, really great to put on a resume. It demonstrates character and giving back, especially valuable if it is relevant, okay? So what about an advanced degree? Okay, if it isn't related to the field that you're targeting, add it, but don't add the focus. You want to downplay it. So you could say just PhD, University of Pennsylvania, instead of adding what it was a PhD in. If it's related to your field, but was received over 20 years ago, add it, but omit the dates. How do I show my relevant experience from 20 years ago? So this would be more for senior candidates, people who've been in the workforce a while. You would add a section to the resume called relevant experience section, right below the experience section. You include company name, city, state, and position. So a very brief amount of information. This can be really important if you've, say, worked with top brands, but again, the experience so far in your past that it's not relevant currently, but you want to showcase that you have interfaced with those brands. This is a great way to use, a great reason to use a relevant experience section. If you're showcasing a technical skill, use discretion, okay? These can very quickly become obsolete. So for example, if you're an engineer and you don't want to add that you worked on rotary phones, okay? That would be outdated technology, and that may feed into some ageism assumptions. So again, for ease of comparison, I'm showing a one-page resume here, but for an executive resume, this would be on 2 pages. So after, excuse me, after the experience section, you see I've added that related experience section, and that's simply how you would want it to look. I spent most of my career at one company. How do I position this so that my experience doesn't look stale? So emphasize multiple roles, promotions as individual roles in order to showcase succession underneath that one company title. Make sure each position has enough information under it to look different. Do not break it down by department or work focus, otherwise that will look like a functional resume. So here's how we'd want to show that. So this is your most recent role. And then you would insert the role you had prior to that at Microsoft. You would insert that right below it. And then add bulleted achievements below that, okay? So that's how you want to account for multiple roles at the same company. And it's great because it shows promotion, it shows promotion and longevity. Other frequently asked questions, PDF versus a Word doc. So you want to use a PDF when you're emailing the application, because that way you're keeping the formatting intact. Say someone opens your document and they have a different type of version of Word or something. If it's in Word, it would be, the formatting would get all funky. So PDF when you're emailing it. You want to use a Word document when you're uploading that to an ATS system, okay? It makes a difference. And I've seen clients go from uploading the PDF to a Word doc and start to experience more responses once they start using a Word doc. So try that if you haven't been doing that. Oops. Do I include my GPA? No GPA. You only do this if the job description specifically asks for it. How do I show I'm open to relocation? You don't need to put that on your resume. The cover letter is an appropriate place to put that, but not the resume. How do I know what the company wants in a candidate? Look at the job description. The job description is where the employer will tell you what they want in a candidate. How will the company know I'm deeply passionate about my field and the role? You let them know this in the cover letter or the LinkedIn profile, okay? Again, that resume is a formal document. It's really giving specific information, not so much talking about career aspirations. How do I show my wide variety of talent and experience? You don't necessarily want to show all of your talent and work. To land more interviews, only show your talent and work that matches what the job description asks for, okay? And again, fall back on LinkedIn as a place to showcase everything you've ever done. Okay, so that's about it for the content today. I just have a few closing thoughts and then I'll open this up for questions. Number one, don't ever forget that great resumes achieve fit, okay? Your resume has to achieve fit to that job posting. Whenever I do a resume review for someone, I tell them I cannot review your resume unless I have a job description to compare it against, okay? Because it has to be tailored and I have to see that you've done this job or you have the potential to do this job based on your resume. Closing thought number two, your resume is important, but don't forget to use all of your job search tools, okay? Remember, you are fixing that kitchen sink. You can't use the hammer to fix every single component, okay? Your resume is not the silver bullet. You are that silver bullet, okay? You are enough. You have what it takes, okay? So use your intuition, use your street smarts, your intellect, and above all, use your personality and you to really sell yourself, okay? Talk to a lot of people, network. It's a great way to get your foot in the door when the resume is not working. Because you essentially are what is going to get you the job in the end, okay? So don't forget that. So that concludes our webinar for today. I want to thank you for attending. For everyone who attended today and for anyone who watches the recording, I'm going to offer 1 month free to my Job Search Accelerator community. And in that community, there are ATS optimized resume templates you can download, cover letter templates you can download. So if you're watching this and you feel a little bit overwhelmed and you feel like, oh my goodness, how am I going to have a resume that looks as good as the resumes in her presentation? Join the accelerator for that free month, download the resume and the cover letter templates, get that, dump your information into them it's worth it. That free month is worth it just for that alone. And this will save you formatting headaches and trying to figure out how to make your template compliant. So little gift that I'm giving because we're all fellow alums, and I'm grateful for my Franciscan University experience and grateful that they have me to teach you guys on resumes. So definitely check that out. It's a little gift just for you. And for the webinar recording, don't forget to visit barronbridge.franciscan.edu. I think, Mary, I got the web domain right there. If not, you could correct me on that. But that's where you can find all of the webinar recordings after today. And hopefully those will serve you well. So I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if there are questions. And I'm not sure if we're doing questions in the chat box or if we're going to unmute people. But Mary, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, if people want to go ahead and put their questions in the chat box, we can go ahead and take a look at them there.
Perfect. So I'll kind of wait a few minutes, and if you have any questions, you can type those in now. And thank you, Gabrielle and Patricia, for your nice notes of appreciation. Lori, thank you. First question from Ella. Let's see. Any advice on tailoring resume information to a CV for pursuing a graduate degree? So the advice, so are you using the CV for purposes of a graduate degree in the United States? Are you going abroad? Where exactly would the graduate degree be pursued? That in the United States. Okay, so she's pursuing so the CV is a little bit different than the resume. I can't go into all the detail here. So I would recommend Googling this, right? That's going to sound very basic, but yes, you can tailor the resume information to a CV. There's specific mechanics involved in that, and I can't unfortunately go into too much detail, but that information should be readily available online. Oftentimes too, graduate programs will provide information on what exactly they're looking for in a CV. So I would just make sure to review the materials and the instructions from the program that I'm applying to as well. But typically, in my experience, the CV is going to be less like a European CV and more look and feel like a resume for graduate programs in the United States. All right, question from Alyssa. I'm recently recovering from a long illness and haven't been able to work since 2015. Any tips on handling disability and illness gaps in my resume? Management of care was a lot of work and I learned a lot, but I'm not sure how to acknowledge it in a way that will be well received. Okay, so Alyssa, I'm sorry that you had to go through all that, but the thing that you want to keep in mind, I guess, when conveying this on your resume is you don't need to go into too much personal detail because that can get sticky. And quite frankly, they don't really have a right to know all of the detail. So less is more. That's the kind of approach you want to take, is a less is more approach. So one thing I would recommend for you is, you could fill the gap by saying, had to take time off for personal reasons. It's perfectly sufficient, and just put the dates that you were off. I would really focus a lot of my efforts, though, on networking, okay? So that you can speak to people in person, so they can see you, so you can control the information that's shared. And people tend to be more understanding when having a conversation with someone versus, taking a 6-second scan of the resume and saying, oh, she didn't work for these many years. So I think a conversation is definitely necessary to accompany your resume in your job search situation. The other thing I'd recommend is, we live in the day and age of freelance gig work, the whole employment environment has totally changed, completely changed. You're hearing of the great resignation and all that, and people are leaving their traditional jobs to take, 3 or 4 different types of jobs, things that they're more passionate about, not necessarily that full-time salary job. So one thing you could do to fill that gap would be to try and pick up something even part-time or freelance, something that's just going to give you a piece of experience to fill the gap. Maybe it's volunteer work, whatever that is, something to fill the gap would be better than nothing, because that is a pretty significant gap. So if there's a field that you're looking to go into and you can find volunteer work in that field, I would suggest doing that, because that way you're filling the gap and you're showing that your skills aren't rusty, that you are able to contribute in a meaningful way. The other piece you wrote about managing your care was a lot of work and you learned a lot. You can use that as part of your branding strategy, right? But only if you're going into a field where that's relevant, okay? I think you can use that also in interviewing and networking conversations, to share some of the things you learned, to support other various transferable skills that they might be looking for in that whatever particular industry you're going into. Okay, Rachel's asking, what to do about time spent with a religious community? All right, Rachel. So I talked a little bit about this a couple times throughout the presentation. And if you remember, I was supporting someone who had been through seminary, then discerned out and decided to jump into the workforce. And a lot of this will depend on what you're targeting for your next job. So if you can even type in the next job or the kind of industry you're targeting, that can help me tailor my advice. But what I've seen is kind of the quickest path to a job for people leaving religious community is usually jumping into some sort of organization that understands that and appreciates that. So great. So administrative. So and administrative in what capacity? Like administrative assistant, university administration, like what type of okay, administrative assistant. Okay. So that is and I imagine you use some of those skill sets in the religious community, because there's a lot of, you have to support people and get along with people and, so on and so forth, follow kind of strict schedules and whatnot. So there's definitely some relevant skills that will transfer over into that type of role. But what I would recommend is to get your foot in the door and start getting kind of real world experience, if you will. I would look for administrative assistant jobs with religious organizations, churches, Catholic schools. There's tons of other Catholic organizations out there. I would look for every organization that's in that space that understands religious life and appreciates that and would see you as an asset from that vantage point. Then once you have an administrative assistant role, once you have that first role, then your administrative assistant skills will become more relevant and more marketable outside of the Catholic or religious kind of networks, if you will. So that's how I would approach the job search. So I would really just focus on using that religious community experience as a strength, targeting people that understand it in terms of organizations and appreciate it. And then, if you want to get outside of Catholic organizations in the future and go for higher level administrative assistant roles, because you're already working as an administrative assistant, now they'll see you as a fit, and they'll be more likely to kind of pull you into other types of organizations. So that's kind of the easiest path that I would follow if I were you. All right, I think that's it for questions. So I want to thank you all again for spending this time with me today, and hopefully you found this helpful. And Mary, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Noelle. This was great, so informative, and we're really happy that you were able to spend this time with us today. And thanks to everyone for attending, and be sure to check your email. I will be sending you that link to the recording, and as well as check out all the